Okay, welcome everyone. As everybody files into the room, it's always fun to see where you're calling in from. So let us know in the chat. We got a lot of people signed up today, so we're gonna give it a minute or two to to before we get it going. Mike and Derek, the most exciting thing that happened over our weekend was there's been a bear in the neighborhood. So came home from pool yesterday. It's a little cool here, so going to the local pool was a bit of a stretch, but found our garbage strewn all over. And yeah, it's at the park down the street, hanging out. So
We get a lot of deer, no bears.
yeah,
But
springtime
there was
is
a fawn born.
oh
So
nice.
yeah.
That's that's cool. All right. Let's see here. We're San Francisco Bay. People all over the country. Excellent. Hello, Sydney. Nice to see you. Right. Well, the numbers are still ticking up, but I'll hit some housekeeping before we get going. So today's webinar is a CFP-CE webinar, 1 hour of CE. So you need to make sure that you're on here for at least 50 minutes and that you hang around till the end and make sure you give us your CFP ID. If you need any kind of uh, evidence for other sorts of CE, let us know. Typically, we have certificates available if you need to put those in your file. Um, we also, I think, just to as long as we've got a few minutes as people are coming on here, we have another webinar tomorrow with Move Health that we're hosting jointly. So definitely check that out. You can find it on LinkedIn, or I'm sure we have different places you can find that. All right. So before we kind of dive into today's topic, I want to introduce the other folks on the webinar with me today. We have Mike Kothakota and Derek Tharp. Um, Mike is a CFP, a researcher, professor of financial planning, has an RIA, Wolfbridge Wealth, and comes to us from North Carolina today, I'm guessing. Uh, it's a
Today.
man on the move. So, and then Derek Tharp, who's often on webinars with us as well. So you probably know him from our webinars or from the Kitsis blog. Derek writes there quite a bit. And Derek is also a professor of financial planning up in Maine. So welcome, Derek and Mike, and thank you very much for being part of today's webinar. So today
Thank you.
we're going to be talking about Social Security, which is, just a huge topic. It's probably, if you sort of look at Google Trends on what, normal people are searching for in financial planning, uh, Social Security claiming strategies are probably two, three, four, five times, maybe 10 times the traffic of some of the other topics that financial planners deal with all the time. So it's really, I mean, and that makes sense. First of all, there's a lot more people who are looking for that. Even if you have $5,000 in an IRA, you still might be thinking about Social Security claiming. But even people with millions in investable assets are looking at how should I best claim Social Security. And actually, for them, it's probably even a tougher question because truly, the full range of possibilities is available to them. Whereas if you don't have a lot of other assets, most likely you're going to be claiming as soon as you stop working. So uh, the topic today is really about going beyond just kind of the basics of Social Security claiming and how benefit checks, benefit amounts would change based on when you claim. Um, However, in case there are folks who are a little less familiar with that, with the basics. We're going to start with the basics today, just to kind of give people a feel for this. So this will be a review for many people, but I think it's a good way to kind of start out. So Social Security can be claimed between ages 62 and 70. Um, Inclusive. So last claiming date is the month you turn 70. And as you wait, your actual benefit check goes up. So the difference between claiming at age 62 and at age 70 is more than 77%, right? So if I had a $1,000 a month check, if I start claiming on my 62nd birthday, it would be 1771 by the time I'm 70. Um, there is something, Social Security, of course, it's a government program, so there's going to be a ton of complexity with it. There is something called full retirement age, or Social Security often calls it normal retirement age. Uh, but I'd say the more standard term is full retirement age that you hear people using. Very soon, uh, full retirement age for those who have not yet reached it will always be 67. So we're getting a lot closer. There were some changes to full retirement age back in, I think it was the 80s. I want to say 1983, um, under Reagan, where there were changes to full retirement age. I think that's when they introduced taxability of Social Security. So little history for you there. But yeah, the folks who were born in 1958 will all hit full retirement age this year. So the latest could be, or they may have already, but in August of this year, those who were born in December of 58 will hit full retirement age. Those who were born in 59, the last of those will hit full retirement age in October of next year, and then we're on to everybody is 67, unless there are changes to the program again someday. So, but for now, current law, that's the situation. So in all the examples that we'll use here, we'll just use someone who was born in 60 or after, where their full retirement age is 67, just to keep things simple. Okay, so if you are one of these, hundreds of thousands, millions of people Googling, when should I claim Social Security? You're going to see a lot of articles that are just going over this 77% difference between 62 and 70. It'll often be a little more nuanced than that. You'll see things about like, hey, every year I wait, I get 8% more. Mostly they're talking about waiting between full retirement age and 70. But in general, they're going to be going over the math of it. Um, and sure, on the face of it, this is a huge difference. For waiting 8 years, you get 77% more. But it's actually not quite that simple. And that's basically what our webinar is about today. So, um, One reason it's not quite so simple is there are several types of benefits. And this is just focusing on retirement benefits, right? We're not talking about um, disability. We're not talking even about, children or anything like that. We're just talking about basically retirement benefits on your own or a spouse's work history. So just basic reviews again. Your own benefits are paid on your own work history, and they're reduced. This concept of full retirement age, there's something associated with it, which is called primary insurance amount, or PIA. That's the amount you would receive if you filed at full retirement age. So for your own benefit, that's reduced if you take early. It's increased if you take after FRA. Spousal benefit is based on your spouse's work history. Um, it is also reduced if you begin receiving it before FRA. It's not increased if you wait, though. So interesting, right? Slight difference here. Also, at this point, you cannot begin a spousal benefit, but not your own. So that used to be something you could finagle, but no longer true. Survivor benefits. So if someone passes away, that is benefits paid after the death of a spouse, and it's even more complex. So it's your deceased spouse's benefit reduced for claiming before FRA, but survivor benefit reductions and dates are different than own benefit. So we're not going to go over that here, but they are slightly different. Um, you wouldn't decrease benefits on death, so you could just maintain your own benefit. And there's even a little bit of a protection thing for not getting your survivor benefit overly reduced because of when your deceased spouse took benefits. So you actually, there's a 82.5% kind of floor on it. So this is also just the beginning. This is like the first couple layers of the onion. The main takeaway, what we're after in this webinar, is not to understand all the intricacies of Social Security. There are many, many more. But really, this is just to say there's a lot of interactions among claiming dates, life expectancy, and each benefit type. And so that's actually why, especially for people with more complex situations, this is kind of a big deal. So um, we will focus a lot on this, which is the claiming decision and going beyond just the math. Because like I said, you'll see if you Google it, to sort of pretend you are your client, right? And Google, when should I claim Social Security? You will see a lot of just focusing on the benefit amount and saying things like, hey, where else could I get an 8% return? Things like that. Basically pushing people toward this concept of, well, that higher benefit check is really what you're after. And for some people that may be true, but that's sort of what you'll see is a focus on in the right-hand column here, the first bullet point. Reasons to claim late, higher benefit check. There are lots of other reasons to claim late. There are also lots of reasons to claim early, things like worries about life expectancy, feelings around opportunity costs like lost investment returns, time value of money. Although people wouldn't often put it this way, there might be worries about sequence of return risk, worries about benefit cuts. There are kind of more psychologically based concerns or benefits around feeling the permission to spend or wanting to quote unquote get something back for a lifetime of paying taxes. So these are kind of some of the basic, you know, pluses to claiming early and pluses to claiming late. And you can see here that already we're going far beyond just, what is the benefit check. There are all of the parts of financial planning, all of the, worries and risks that people have come into play here. And that's why this is a really rich area to spend some time on with clients. So to get us kicked off, going beyond the basics there, I will ask Mike and Derek in turn, um, just to give us a feel for, in your own practice, how do you approach Social Security claiming? Do you have sort of a general philosophy? How important is it? Do you have, a personal philosophy about sort of leaning toward early, mid, late, or is it more depending on the client, and what sorts of discussions you have, all that sort of thing. So we'll start with you, Mike.
Yeah. So, I mean, my general philosophy is that it should be individual to the client. We work with, everybody has an idiosyncratic situation. And so what the problem with a lot of these articles and a lot of the Googling and a lot of even some of the research articles is that you do tend to lose that in looking at the averages, you tend to lose this the nuance of an individual client. So I tend to just, I spend a lot of time getting to know the client, getting to know what their perspective. You mentioned a lot of the psychological factors, health factors. All of those are important in helping a client determine, you know, when they're going to claim. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Derek, what about you? Kind of any general approaches you take with clients?
Yeah, I'd say I do have some clients that come in with like a strong preference in one direction or another. Like they want to claim at 62, they want to claim at 70. So that's always something I'm, kind of working around. I would say though, if somebody is in that more doesn't have a strong opinion, I have always kind of defaulted more to the, well, if we can afford to delay, that's something worth looking at. I'd say though that some of the playing around with different scenarios and things we've been doing here in the with the income lab tool actually is kind of shifting my perspective though, to maybe not defaulting quite so strong to delaying if we can. And my usual rationale has always just been the especially thinking about Social Security being kind of actuarially fair for the average American, and most of my clients don't have longevity profiles that match the average American. But yeah, I think we're really starting to see some different trends that might push me in a little different direction going forward. So yeah, it's been
Yeah,
really interesting to use the tool.
definitely. Um, how do you each like what place does Social Security claiming play in sort of a planning and process with you? Is there like a specific step? Are there, tools you use or things, or is it just sort of kind of seamlessly woven into the rest of your planning?
Well, I mean, it is. I wouldn't say that it's seamless. I mean, typically we talk in general terms about the amounts at specific ages, and it's all in the context of their values and their goals, right? So people who are wanting to retire early, you start to look more at the 62. If they're going to keep working, if they want to work till they're 70, a lot of times it doesn't. Why claim it early, right? It doesn't make sense to do that. It's they're earning their income, but we're not going to take that. So although you do occasionally have the conversation about like, well, what if it's not there, and so I want to take it as much as I can, but I usually get through that pretty easily. But the folks who they've retired at have some folks who've retired at 45, taking maybe they're taking a former spouse's benefit because they're divorced. Often it makes sense for them to take it early. Like it just kind of depends on what they're trying to do.
Right. Derek, how about you? Is there like a step or a specific conversation you tend to have with clients about this?
Mhm. I mean, I do a fair number of like educational type events, and so for a decent number of people who I might connect with through that, it might actually be one of the first things we're talking about because I did do a webinar or some sort of event around that. So in some cases, it's kind of kicking things off and then leading into a broader discussion about the retirement plan. But I would say in general, it is just kind of one of the if somebody came to me completely cold and we're just working through a full plan, it is one of those steps in the process. I do find it's one that's harder to get oftentimes that like real accurate information when it comes to trying to figure out exactly what somebody's the best estimate we can, because somebody may not, even if they have their social security benefit statement, may not have their full earnings history. And if we don't have their full earnings history, it may not map over perfectly to what their unique options are, because Social Security Administration might be making different working assumptions than they would be doing. So I do try to get that full earnings history from clients when I can, but it's harder to track down now that it's no longer on the actual Social Security statement. So for me, like in a real practical sense, that's kind of a blocking point, but that's where I'll rely on just, okay, maybe we just have a rough assumption based on somebody's income, or maybe we actually have the primary insurance amount and that's better and we can work from that, but then work that into the plan. And historically, kind of trying to look at some different scenarios, even with something like stress test in terms of, okay, here's what your results look like claiming at 62, here's what results look like claiming at 70, and then anywhere in between.
Yeah. So Derek, I know you referenced the Income Lab tool and kind of how it has gotten you thinking about a few things. So I'll share that. This was just launched today, actually. Still in beta, but very close to taking that beta tag off. So this gives you a feel for those trade-offs. So in this situation, we have two people, John and Mary, both are before age 62. So just, basically giving them all the options, since if they were already 65 or something, we just wouldn't be able to use the earlier claiming options. And I think this is a common thing Derek mentioned, thinking about life expectancy. Um, it's common to have a plan, a financial plan that plans into the late 80s, 90s, even mid 90s, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, because often people want to see that they have a plan for if they do live a really long time, and for certain people that's actually even like very important. I mean, in my family, for example, on my mom's side, I mean, uh, I think her my, yeah my grandma is still alive on that side. My great aunt lived to 104. I mean, those are things to consider. And when you do consider a long life expectancy, it's really easy to have a if you're just looking at maximizing or optimizing Social Security in terms of total lifetime benefits, the longer you assume that life will be, the more you'll push toward age 70. I mean, hopefully that's sort of intuitive. Um, but if that's not the situation where if people are, a little more maybe average or that kind of thing, like I'll just reduce these life expectancies down to 81 and 84. Um, and you'll notice, immediately we move from 70 and 70 down to 68 and 65. I've actually included something here, which is, hey, give me a fudge factor, because obviously we don't actually know people's real date of death. And so show me sort of in this case, I'm using within 1.5% of the maximum lifetime benefit. And you can see, I can be all the way down here at 67 and 62 and still be pretty close. Oh, by the way, I think forgot to mention this, but in this case, John has $3,000 in PIA, meaning if he claims at 67, his benefit would be 3,000. Mary's is 1,000. I made Mary's lower so that we would see a spousal benefit in this case. And I can always hit snap to optimal to get back to the highest number here. So this is kind of an interesting place where if we play around with life expectancies, you'll see these numbers change quite a bit. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you change life expectancy in the plan, or plan length might be a better way to think about it. But it's the kind of thing that gets at this worry about mortality risk that people, I think, bring in when they're thinking about Social Security, because they hear wait till 70 and they probably start thinking about people they know. Maybe they retired, at 69 and then, unfortunately died at 70 or something. And so I think there's this risk, often when we see the numbers, we think, oh, people should wait till 70. Why is it that a lot of clients don't want to delay? Well, how come so many clients want to claim early? That's also something you'll see, by the way, if you Google and try to find articles not by advisors or, economists, but by ordinary individuals. There is a lot of kind of talk about like, I'd rather claim early. And sometimes when people have that feeling, it's at least my impression that we should probably take it seriously. They may be thinking about something we're not addressing. And I think one of the biggest ones is probably life expectancy. I think they're thinking to themselves, well, wait a second, it's not guaranteed that I live that long. And so I think playing around with life expectancy, not necessarily changing plan length, but playing around with it, you'll see the numbers move. You see now that I put them in their 70s, that they're going to want to claim as early as possible. So I know, Mike, you've had some experiences around, with clients who maybe have had those thoughts or even lived through situations like that, where that's come into play. So I wonder if you could share some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a number of clients actually die well before life expectancy. I mean, these are affluent people. I mean, you've even seen the news recently, Congress people dying in, mid 60s. And so when you start to think about, if we push everybody's plan to 95, it's a good bet that most of your clients aren't going to live to 95. It's just highly unlikely that that's going to happen. And so when I talk to clients, it's about the things that they want to do. And, I always, the example that comes to mind when I think of claiming early is, this, woman who, her father had died early. So she had some concerns about, her own longevity. She was a librarian her whole life, but she's an artist, and she wanted to take these painting classes in Paris. And the interesting thing about this was this, I mean, she had enough money to do this, but we were in a downturn. So the macroeconomic conditions on the ground didn't make sense for her to increase her withdrawals. And we just had the discussion about Social Security. Well, here's a certain amount that'll allow you to take this trip. It's not gonna hugely negatively impact your long-term plan, even if you do live to 95, right? So having these conversations about like, even if you do take it early, what is the big impact of it down the road? And I had my meeting with her, shortly, maybe a year after she got back, we had a meeting where the first thing she said to me was, thank you for, talking me through that. I'm so glad I got to see Paris. And she then proceeded to tell me she was terminal. And this woman was going to die at 64, well before FRA, right? And so these are situations where, as financial planners, we're not working with the averages. We're working with individual clients who have their own values, their own goals. And we can give them numbers till we're blue in the face, but like her value was maximized by taking, Social Security at 62. And so there are any number of examples where this is true. I've had, conversely, I had one client think they were going to live very long, and then they, never claimed Social Security because they died at 68. So it is a very, mortality risk is a huge deal that we don't think about a lot of times. And on that slide where you pointed to the reasons to take early, all of that needs to be part of the discussion. Like when you're talking about sequence of return risk, what are the macroeconomic conditions on the ground at the time? What is their personal situation at the time? And what is their spending glide path? Like, are they going to spend more early? Are they going to spend more, later? Do they have insurance for some of that later stuff? So I think that is the story that comes to mind for me anytime I think about when somebody says you should always wait till you're 70.
Yeah.
Just because it was definitely not true for this individual, and I've seen that play across in any number of client scenarios.
Yeah, that permission to spend side of it is something that that's not really like quantifiable. We'll talk about sequence of return risk and opportunity cost here in a second, but there is also this. We've talked about it a lot on our webinars. There's a cohort of people who really could actually spend. They could retire now, or they could spend more than they are spending in retirement, but they struggle to kind of feel the permission to spend, permission to live their life without kind of fear. And there is something about receiving a Social Security check that helps, the decision to go to Paris, right? That kind of, hey, some of this is coming from, a source other than my IRA. And so that one's a little bit harder to quantify. But if the goal is to help people live, the most fulfilling lives they can, given their resources and the life they happen to have, that's actually an important piece. Um, the other piece is really interesting. You mentioned the sequence of return risk, where maybe someone's retiring, into a down market, or you're worried about continued losses. So then taking Social Security takes some pressure off of the portfolio. So you're not taking withdrawals into a down market. So not exacerbating sequence of return risk, which really means taking Social Security as a way to buffer the portfolio. And so, in a sense, taking Social Security early, if things happen to be bad, you may look back and think, "Oh, that was a good choice because my portfolio didn't suffer as much as it would have." The funny thing is the flip side of it is opportunity cost. So if you care a lot about your portfolio balance, even if you're going into a good market, you may, if you earn more than the Social Security ended up getting you, there's actually a lost investment return side of it too. So if somebody cared a lot about their portfolio balance, they may actually also want to claim Social Security early, if they think markets are going to be really good because more money in the market, right? So it's sort of this very strange, like both sides of the coin. If you're focused on portfolio, would benefit from taking Social Security early potentially. So I think that's also not kind of well understood. And we'll go over some examples here in a second about stress testing. I think Derek mentioned stress testing, Social Security claiming. Um, Derek, before we move on, though, are there any kind of I don't know, client profiles or things you've experienced that you wanted to share?
I mean, similar to Mike, I think we all have those stories of clients who passed away early. I mean, even personally, my father passed away earlier this year at 64. And so, he was still working and claimed pension and claimed Social Security. That wasn't the plan that he was looking for. But, I think those just really thinking about kind of that, okay, how do we kind of that die with zero type mentality that I think resonates with a lot of people in terms of how do we at least get more and we get more to people when they're healthier and when they can enjoy it more and they can actually take advantage of it. And then I've been spending a lot of time, I think, also thinking about kind of just the mental accounting around different and loss aversion related to like claiming Social Security versus portfolio losses. And I think there's interesting trade-offs there where, yeah, people definitely put those in different mental buckets and they think about, I've paid into Social Security my whole life. I haven't received anything, right? Especially as advisors might be really pushing them hard. Okay, no, let's not claim, let's not claim. And there could be a lot of regret that somebody has about, yeah, I ultimately paid into this a long time. I didn't get anything from it. And so I think that's another just thinking about the individual's own perspective and their goals and their values and how we weigh all that against it that really should be maybe given a little bit more thought than it is in kind of a default delay until 70 sort of perspective.
Yeah. I think we had a few questions already. One of them was just, can you go over this graph and just tell me again what I'm seeing? Which, fair enough, I think I did a bad job of saying what this is. So this is a heat map showing claiming ages. In this case, John's are along the bottom, the x-axis, Mary's are along the side, the y-axis, and it's for every combination. And there's 9,000 plus possible combinations here because you can claim in any month between 62 and 70. And for each combination, so for example, here it's, John claims in June 2030, Mary in September of 2030. And it's saying, okay, well, their lifetime expected benefits given these life expectancies um, is 616,663. And for every combination, there is a lifetime benefit amount. Just to give an example here, if we look at the scenario details for this one, um, and this is in today's dollars, so no future inflation included. Obviously, you could view it with future inflation included because Social Security is inflation adjusted. But you'll see, each of the benefits, John's benefit, Mary's spousal benefit, when John dies, the survivor benefit, and so on. I'm going to flip to one that actually has a break-even point because I don't think that one does. And here we'll make these folks older again, or die older, rather. There we go. And here, if we look for the break even, no, this one doesn't have one either. That's weird. I'd better pick another. Oh, it's probably because it's a, yeah. Anyway, I'll have to pick a better example for you later. But the idea is that delaying, in this case, for example, the break even point is 18 years from now. And so this is another way for you to think like, okay, well, it does look like there's more lifetime benefits for this particular claim, but they're not really going to hit that point until 18 years from now. So that's another way to just think about it, even without messing with life expectancy, is just think, okay, well, we're into our late 70s. Like, could we make it that far? Sure, but what's your feeling about how long you're going to live there? Um, so anyway, that's people were asking kind of about that. There's a few other things on here, maybe before we move on to some other topics about some other risks. So basically, we've talked about mortality risk, which again, That's actually not something you hear a lot about in kind of basic financial planning. You hear much more about longevity risk, like let's cover for the chances that you actually live a long life. And as Derek said, a lot of times people who have financial advisors, they actually do, as a statistic, have a higher life expectancy because they tend to have some assets. So they might have, had better health insurance and all sorts of things along the way. There's all sorts of things that kind of lean into longer life expectancy. I also heard, an individual is not a statistic. They're going to have their own particular, they're either going to be all alive or all dead, not 80% there. Um, and so that's an interesting thing to think about. The other risks, which there's actually been a lot of talk about lately, is changes to the program. So warranted or not, people are concerned about possible reductions in benefits. And of course, we have no particular uh, crystal ball or insight into how the program could change, if at all, in the future. I mentioned that in the 80s it did change, so like we know that Social Security can change. But one thing to think about is, well, what would an optimal claiming strategy look like if there were a reduction? And right now, the trustees of the Social Security Administration are predicting that in 2033, if no changes whatsoever are made to the program, people would see a 21% reduction in benefits. So if I include that, um, then again, you move toward a little bit earlier claiming. Um, I don't know, Mike and Derek, do you run into this as a topic? I know there've been some articles in like the Wall Street Journal and things lately about this. How often do you talk about it?
I can go first. I mean, I talk about it. I mean, it always comes up. And we typically will use what's on the Social Security's website as a primer, but just kind of in general, when you think about just the discussion around the debt, the deficit, how Social Security is funded. I mean, a lot of what's currently happening is not, what's currently funded is not necessarily funded from the trust fund. Like people, that reduction is not necessarily just, oh, well, that's when the trust fund runs out of money. We fund this through federal taxes. And right now, we're talking about a tax decrease. We're not talking about anything that's associated with adjusting Social Security. So this is something that's incredibly important. Most people would say, well, they're eventually fix it, right? Because otherwise, they're voting against their self-interest. I mean, uh, it appears to me that people continually vote against their self-interest, not only the public, but also folks in Congress. So it comes up all the time, and it is a huge discussion point, especially particularly for clients who rely for a significant portion of their income from Social Security.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I get questions from clients about it all the time, especially just confusion around what it actually means and what cuts would look like. I mean, I do personally think I shouldn't try to make predictions. I'm sure I'll just look foolish doing that. But if I did try and make some sort of prediction, I think the outright cuts to benefits to people 55 and above, um, probably lower risk in my view. But I do think there's lots of ways they could play around with the system that would still achieve the exact same thing of reducing benefits. It wasn't that long ago we were talking about chained CPI and kind of changing how the CPI calculation works that might get a little bit less public resistance because it's a more complex way of talking about reducing future benefits, but it still has that exact same impact of reducing future benefits. So it's obviously one of the levers that can be pulled to try and shore things up. And I think especially for higher income clients as well, like somebody that has substantial retirement income in addition to their Social Security probably is at more risk just in terms of possibly having some policy changes. So yeah, I think it's absolutely something that comes up and clients want to know about and
Yeah,
some conversations around.
absolutely. I did just to circle back to what I was showing before. Here's the break-even point actually being shown. I think I had a bad example there earlier where there wasn't a break-even point because they were already claiming really early. But here's one where if one person claims in 2028 and another claims in 2034, that the difference between claiming as early as possible the cumulative benefits hit in 2047. Back to what you were saying there, though, I mean, essentially what we're doing here is your this is I guess Mike, you can correct me on this, but this is when the trust fund runs out and it has to be funded only from tax receipts, which are not enough to cover benefits. And so yeah, that's sort of the prediction there. And you can mess around with this, change the date, change the reduction amount. As Derek just said, if there are changes, the changes made in the past were around things like what's FRA, what are how are we dealing with inflation? So it's tinkering at a very different level. This is a sort of a gross, if nothing else changes first. But I think it's a decent stand-in for that. We did have some questions about clarification on the whole, well, what if I don't live long enough to receive? Um, and you're right that the survivor benefit is absolutely still available. But still the lifetime benefits would be affected. So what you're seeing here in the heat map is total lifetime benefits of all sorts: own benefit, spousal benefit, survivor benefit. So for example, you see it here, right, where we have um, the the date of death. You can push those out later, but it's all being affected here. So survivor benefits don't sort of, you know, cover all sins for when you might claim. It's yes, they're still available, and yes, they're affected by when someone claims. They'll be higher if someone claims later. But really, the total lifetime benefit is just a matter of summing it all up. There is one other piece that we haven't gone over here, which is there's a bunch of other stuff, in particular opportunity cost and the flip side of that being sequence of return risk that's not covered by just thinking about how long someone lives or whether benefits might be cut. And so that's an interesting piece to add to the puzzle. Um, I think it was Mike, you said there was a situation where someone was retiring, markets looked shaky, and so the thought was, hey, maybe we should go ahead and claim, give us a little bit of a buffer. Protect our portfolio a little bit. If as I add opportunity cost, which is that's really just a discount rate, right? That's a net present value. That's time value of money, however you want to talk about it. It's saying a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow. And this is saying, well, how much more? And obviously, if you make this, pretty high, it's going to shove your optimal claiming date really early because you're just saying, hey, that stuff 20 years from now, it's not worth much to me, for whatever reason. It could be the softer reasons about, hey, I prefer money today. I want to go to Paris, that kind of stuff. Hey, I'm healthy today. I know I'm around today. So it actually is also a little bit of a life expectancy mortality risk piece. But it also has to do with the possibility of earning that dollar that I take in Social Security is a dollar less I have to take from my portfolio. And so that's a dollar that either would earn investment return, or it's a dollar that I'm not taking out at the bottom of a market or as a market is going down. So opportunity cost is really this kind of catch-all. It's just a way of changing this net present value calculation. So if I just turn this off, my 450,000 is now 795,000, right? And that's just because I'm no longer discounting the the dollars in the future. One thing that is always being discounted here, discount's probably the wrong word, but we're stripping out inflation. So now that is basically assuming that inflation adjustments, COLA keeps up with the client's real inflation, which is a question that Derek just brought up. But that's how all that works. So hopefully that makes some sense. I know people had a few questions about that. All right. Um, Before we go on to kind of looking at the stress test that Derek just mentioned, I want to kind of ask more of a philosophical question, which is, often when we're doing this sort of Social Security claiming discussion, we're focused just on Social Security. Um, I know that we've already brought up some things that have to do with the connection between Social Security and other parts of the plan, but what are your thoughts on, is that a good idea? Is it a thing that clients just tend to do? They tend to think like, hey, let's just focus in on Social Security. Um, do you try to encourage them to think about its impact on the broader plan, on the portfolio, on taxes, and so on? What's your approach?
Mike, you and take it, or I'll take this one first. But
Yeah.
for me, when I look at that, I definitely do want that bigger picture, more holistic sort of view. And so really trying to see, um, what is the impact on taxes? What is the impact? And that for me is a big one, especially if somebody's doing Roth conversions. Like that can be a reason why even somebody who might want to claim early, maybe we're still doing some pretty aggressive Roth conversions in 62, 63. Maybe that's a minor reason to bump things out. Um, and then also just looking at the overall impact on kind of the plan, right? We always have this trade-off. We talked about the mortality risk of that dying prematurely, but then there's the longevity risk of that inflation protected income. So like trying to understand how it fits within the broader plan. And so that is very important to me to have both of those views. But I do think, yeah, it is one area that people tend to be pretty siloed, and might kind of look at it as like, okay, I've got this one decision to make here without necessarily looking at the bigger picture plan. But at the same time, that's I know we'll get to some ways you can do that here in Income Lab, but that's historically been very hard to do, to see how does that fit within the context of the plan and what are those long, down the road sorts of implications to the portfolio, to retirement income. And so I do think the more we can give people an easy way to see that, I think that'll be beneficial.
Yeah. I think, particularly like if you have, very clients who tend to be, I think ignoring the emotional piece of this is, we can talk math all day, but like the reality is that people have feelings about Social Security. They have feelings about, we have mental accounting. Like it's a real thing. People think of Social Security as something. People who think it's going to go away want to get it as soon as possible. Some people don't think about it. They just think about it as like an extra thing. Some people, even think that like, oh, it just feels like the government giving them money. So a lot of this is education, a lot of it, and they don't want to be on the government dime. And so there are any number of ways people present about this. And I think it is part of a plan, but there's so much more to a financial plan than Social Security. It can be an important part for sure, and the
Yeah.
claiming strategy can be important, but I don't think it needs to be. I think talking about it in the context of the overall plan, like Derek mentioned, is what makes
Yeah.
the most sense.
So this is where we get into that. So we were just looking at the lifetime benefit, just a heat map for lifetime benefits, maybe discounted net present value if you add that, opportunity cost, maybe messing around with life expectancy and so on. But moving just to the entire plan. So this is these same folks. They also have $1 million portfolio. And we're just looking at how what they can spend overall. So just between Social Security and a portfolio. A lot of plans are more complex than that, right? But we're keeping it pretty simple. Um, how the actual, what we call spending capacity or retirement paycheck is affected, meaning between taking it from your portfolio and maybe future benefits, how much can you spend? Keeping risk, sequence of return risk and all that the same. Um, and so what I do think is really interesting is for all this talk about maximizing lifetime Social Security benefits, for these folks where Social Security is a big part of their plan, they have $1 million, and a lot of people have less than $1 million. Social Security is a big part of their plan, and yet the difference between kind of the most they could spend, which is $6,600 a month, to the least they could spend, which is $6,100 a month. Um, we're talking about less than a $500 a month difference for taking between 62, and in this case, the optimal is actually, 69 and 63. So that's that's not nothing. $500 a month is a big deal. But I do think it's pretty interesting, to compare kind of pure benefit thinking, where you're thinking to yourself, do I want to give up this 77% increase from 62 to 70? In this case, most optimal is not to wait till 70 for both of them, but um, you're sort of okay. We're actually more like fine tuning. And if you're talking about, even a year's difference, uh, not much of a difference at all, right? I mean, these are very small differences in total plan possible spending. Um, for what it's worth, there may be plans where it's even bigger. If you have more assets, it would be even smaller, right? Because so if you have 3 million or 5 million or 10 million, the role that Social Security is playing, although still important, it would just have a smaller effect on the overall ability to spend, because it, is a smaller portion of the overall um, set of resources. So that's what you're seeing here is how much could I spend at a defined date, the retirement date, which here I have it at 62, right? So that I either begin at 62 and I'm taking Social Security, or I begin at 62 and then wait 8 years and I'm just spending my portfolio in those intervening years. And we're seeing for each combination, here we're just stepping through by year rather than month, because the monthly differences are so tiny, they're not worth talking about. Um, and we're finding the kind of highest spending amount, and for them it's 69 and 63. For this plan, it's a longer plan, right? So they're living into their 90s. So that's where we're coming from here. Um, Maybe I'll slot in an interesting discussion seems to be going on in the Q&A about sort of what regret feels like with delaying Social Security or not. Um, I think there's an interesting point someone was saying in here. I actually, I think on the face of it, disagree. If you think about regret, if someone delays till 70 and then, they have a terminal diagnosis at 71, they'll regret not having taken earlier, right? So they'll actually know about and think about and actually regret it. Whereas I wonder, I don't know if Mike and Derek, if you have thoughts on this, if you take it 62 or 65 or whatever, and then you live till 90, will people really spend a long time sitting there thinking about, oh, I wish I had waited till 70? I kind of doubt it, but I'm not sure what your thoughts are.
I mean, I think I was responding to Eric. I mean, his questions are, um, really, really interesting and really thoughtful. But what I was thinking of is, as you get older, the money doesn't provide as much utility. So there's this
Right.
curve of decreasing utility. And so I think it's challenging to think about it linearly. Like
Yeah.
it's, as you get older, your risk of dying increases. What's the difference between one day and 30 years? I mean, I think that could potentially be a big difference. But at the same time, we have this go, slow go, no go type situation with retirement. Like, are you really going to worry about that much money later on in life? Is it worth more to you when you could have used it to do things, when you were younger and you were able? And so these are all really important points. I mean, I think we can look at it from the, pure homo
Right.
economic, I don't know how to say it, but the completely rational person.
Yeah.
But I think even then, when you're talking about personal utility, everybody's utility curves are different. And so
Right.
I just don't think that, I think this is where this is where the people on this call provide the most value, is getting into like, well, okay, how is it going to work for you? And then this tool can help us have that conversation.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And just to weigh in quick, I think for me, maybe if somebody was really on the fence, like they really thought hard about, should I claim early, should I claim late, and they really thought they had short longevity, right? Maybe that person, it would bother them. I think most people, it's not really going to be something that bothers them if they do live longer. I mean, you could also think about like portfolio decisions, right? In most cases, you could rewind the clock and say if somebody went into retirement with an 80% stock portfolio instead of 60% stock portfolio, they would have more. They could, in theory, regret that difference, but I don't think most people really think that way. And so yeah, personally, I think the regret is probably a little bit bigger on the hey, I delayed and now I have terminal diagnosis or I'm going to pass sooner. That's where I think you're probably going to feel a little bit more of that just in my gut feeling.
Yeah.
Um, but then I think another important part of just the whole discussion and kind of ties into that for me is also thinking about kind of the optionality that is built into Social Security. Like you don't have to pick an all or nothing strategy where it could be you kind of have to decide, do you want to claim at 62, or if you decide, well, maybe we'll put it off from there. Before full retirement age, if we do hit poor sequence of returns or anything like that, somebody wants to turn their Social Security on or their health changes, they always can do that. And then after full retirement age, you even get the 6 months of retroactive claiming of your benefits. And so for me, that's a big, just thinking about, okay, even if somebody wants to delay, it's not like they have to commit to delaying until 70. It's let's kick the can down the road 6 months and kind of reevaluate from there.
Yeah. So in the last couple of minutes we have here, I wanted to get to the stress test that Derek was mentioning, and this gets to opportunity cost and sequence of return risk as well. So for those of you not familiar with Income Lab, what this is doing is taking a particular plan and it's running it through the sequence of returns and inflation for that plan. So as Derek said, a more aggressive portfolio would have higher volatility and higher income, and so on. Um, and kind of like having a more aggressive portfolio, having a more aggressive Social Security claiming, meaning delaying, uh, will typically, I mean, I can't think of any cases where it wouldn't mean you can spend more. Maybe some cases where you don't have a lot of other assets, but and so that's what you're seeing here. The claiming at 70 is a couple $100 more, not even, 160 bucks higher to begin with than the claiming at 62. So you do get a benefit, but because you are taking higher sequence of return risk, when I hit it with the global financial crisis, I mean, they both go down, but the claim at 62 doesn't go down quite as much because I'm not taking out as much money, right? So I'm at 631,000 versus 605. I can change this to nominal so that we're including inflation in here. Um, but on the recovery, you see a real separation of these because I'm allowing more money to stay in the portfolio as it's recovering. And so, by the 2020s and today, we're looking at, a over $500,000 difference in balance. Um, the they both are kind of increasing their income. So for those of you not familiar with Income Lab, you have these guardrails that are if things are going poorly, you'll adjust your income down. If they're going well, you adjust your income up. And you can see, actually by the 2020s, the claim at 62 is actually higher because you have a higher balance, right? And so you're supporting higher spending. And so this, I think, is a great illustration of how it is just not so clear that claiming at 70, even if that means a higher benefit amount, even if it means a higher total lifetime benefit, that question of shouldn't we consider the entire plan together, I think this is like a resounding yes, we should, because it can be a little counterintuitive how Social Security claiming and benefit and withdrawals like interact here. So I don't know if Derek and Mike, if you had other comments on that before we close.
I just completely agree, especially looking at those portfolio balances, thinking about, reserve for long-term care expenses, thinking about some of those important things that could come with that. To me, you have to look at the whole picture to really have a good sense.
And frankly, like, I mean, I would say that this has kind of been an intuitive kind of thought I've had since I've kind of been in the business, without even before you even look at the math, just kind of thinking about it like conceptually, it seems like that it makes more sense, even including longevity. But again, I think it does, there are several people in the comments talking about when they claimed and it's worked for them and that they're happier and that it can be an emotional decision. So I do think it all kind of comes in there, but I think having the ability to see what that might look like, I think is incredibly important for people.
So I know we had a whole bunch of questions about the tools we've been showing here. We will be having another webinar to go over all of that in depth, how it works. People were asking for sort of a step-by-step how an advisor would use it, conversations, things like that. So we'll be doing another webinar. This was more conceptual, strategic, how we do it with clients, um, the entire picture. But we will have, not for CFP because you can't get CE for learning software tools, but we will have another webinar to help you learn more about this tool in particular. So stay tuned for that. I think it's coming in a week or two. So um, with that, thank you very much to our panelists, Mike Kothakota and Derek Tharp. And thank you everyone for joining us. Please stick around, fill out that survey so you can get your CE, and we'll see you again. See you soon again. Take care. Bye bye.